happens when, well, an information security incident is something we need to respond to in a resilient fashion. So there's a lot of overlap in this. So I wouldn't give too much weight to the actual that ISACA publishes on this, because there's so much overlap anyway. Again, this presentation is being recorded. It'll be available to you within 24 to 48 hours, along with the entire slide deck. And also, as we're about to talk about, we are going to make some extra practice questions available to you outside of the O'Reilly system. It's not sponsored by O'Reilly. It's not actually provided by O'Reilly, but I managed to talk Certified Information Security, a company I work for, into providing some complimentary access to some practice questions. And as some of you have already tried and seen that you've registered for it but don't have access yet, I promise you will. I'll take care of that during break. So the course overview, again, this is an 8-hour condensed version of a class that I normally teach over 3 full days. So that's why I have to speak so quickly, and that's why we'll be covering the content in such a rapid fashion. However, recognize that nonetheless, there will be some content that we kind of skip through and it kind of gets left on the editing room floor for the sake of time. It's just difficult to fit 3 days into 8 hours. That's all there is to it. So again, the nice thing is I'm going to be not only just teaching you concepts, but I'm going to be showing you how ISACA may word questions about those concepts, kind of getting you accustomed to how you'll be tested on it if you haven't already tried the exam once before. So basically, I'm going to have bulleted concepts of knowledge, but I'll bolster them with examples that you might see. Another thing, too, is any of the things that you need to really emphasize and memorize for the exam, I tried to go ahead and, well, boldface italicize the font for you in the slide presentation. So that way it's essentially kind of like highlighting the content for you to really, really draw your attention to what you need to memorize. Again, we have up to 5 days of access to 200 CISA practice questions that I myself authored. So these were not scarfed up from some downloadable internet site. These are ones that I actually made for the exam itself. We're going to be trying some of those practice questions throughout this teaching as well, just to get you ready for it. So essentially, how do you access these practice questions? Well, you'll begin by going to this link provided, where you will then add to cart. Well, add to cart, I don't want to buy anything. Well, you are buying it, but at a cost of $0. There is no cost associated with this. But remember, it's only 5 days of access from the end of this session. So again, it's a free offering. So, what do we say? Beggars can't be choosers. But still, at least you'll have 5 days of access to some pretty good practice questions to help you really flex your muscles and feel that you kind of have a handle on things. So you'll be adding this product to your cart. The price is $0, of course, and you'll complete the purchase and have immediate access to the questions. And again, if you've already registered but aren't seeing access, I'll fix that on break, I promise you. Again, access expires 5 days after the end of program, regardless of your start date. So if you try to start 5 days from now, hoping to get another 5 days, nope, it's a hard finite subscription period that expires 5 days after this class. So again, this is based on a full 40-hour CISA super review that I authored and published. It's available at Certified Information Security. It's not required, of course, but if any of you do want to take a look at that, there is a free demo on the Certified Information Security website. That's there for your perusal. So let's go ahead and take a look at our content coming up. In this first day, we're going to, again, cover Domain 1, the information systems auditing process. That takes a total of about 75 minutes. That'll take us through to, I'm in the Eastern time zone. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. That's where I'm speaking from now. That'll take us through till about 1:15 Eastern time. We'll break for 10 minutes and then continue on with CISA Domain 2, Governance and Management of IT. We'll spend about an hour on that. We'll go ahead and take another quick break as long as we're on track. And then we will continue into Domain 3, Information Systems Acquisition, Development, Implementation, and do some test-taking strategies to conclude the day. Day 2, we're going to jump into information systems operations and business resilience. That's going to take about an hour and 35 minutes. We'll take a break and then continue on with protection of information assets. That is a killer session that we actually put a break in the middle of because it's so long. There is a lot of content there. That is approximately 2 hours and 10 minutes in total. We will then, again, have a little short summary session there at the end of the day, if time permits, and that will conclude on the second day. So, as we go along, I will try my best to keep an eye on the attendee chat. As you've seen, trying to make sure that I can, help you as I can. If I don't see it right away, I hope you'll forgive me, but because sometimes I get caught up in teaching this, but I will try to keep an eye on it. And if you have any questions, please use the attendee chat. That's where your questions will go. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the content. The first thing is the process of auditing information systems. This definition that you're seeing on the slide is ISACA's definition. Providing IS audit services in accordance with IS audit standards, guidelines, and best practices to assist the organization in ensuring that its information technology and business systems are protected and controlled. That is ISACA's definition. So what is the definition then of not IS services, information system auditing services, but rather the definition of a control itself? You need to know the difference between those definitions. A control is what we put in place to manage some kind of risk. I told you it was a risk-based approach. So a control by ISACA's definition is the policies, procedures, and practices, as well as organizational structures that are designed to provide reasonable assurance. That reasonable is very important. I'll tell you why, because in a question, they may say absolute, and you would say that's not the right answer. Controls can't provide absolute assurance. They provide reasonable assurance. I'm already giving you a little bit of feel for the exam itself. ISACA is tricky that way. One little small word changes one answer from another. So you can have two very similar answers. One has this exact definition but says absolute assurance. The other one says reasonable assurance. You'll have to remember reasonable. So again, going back to it's designed to provide reasonable assurance that business objectives will be achieved and that undesired events will be prevented or detected and corrected. Folks, if you look at that, that's a long way of talking about risk management is what it is. Key themes that you need to know for ISACA is everything they question you about, they're always wanting to make sure that you remember your job and our job as systems auditors is to make sure that we better support organizational goals and objectives. That drives everything. So we see that they're attaching that we're trying to have reasonable assurance that business objectives, there's that business objectives, will be achieved, undesired events, which are risks that will be prevented, detected, and corrected. That's what controls do. Now, one of the things we have to look at early on is whether it be conducting an audit, as we are in this module, or performing IT management, either way, the auditing of IT or the practice of IT itself is really running projects. Projects themselves have project risks that need controls. So ISACA may test you about the generic project life cycle and how it's applied and how it's controlled for purposes of an IS audit, as well as for perhaps managing IT itself. We'll get to that later in a different module. So essentially, you don't need to know a lot about this. You don't need to be a project management professional, a PMP, but you do need to know the generic project lifecycle of planning that then leads to scheduling, that then leads to monitoring and controlling, and then finally concluding. So again, what we're looking at here is just having a basic understanding of these phases of a project lifecycle. So in phase one, this is where we do our planning of the project. This is where we'll set our time, cost, and scope. We may need to identify our audit resources that we'll need for our audit project. We also then have to schedule the project, as I've talked about already. Within that, we will create a timetable for each activity. Later on, you're going to find out that ISACA may have questions that will ask you, well, what are good tools for creating timetables for an activity? And your appropriate answer would be a Gantt chart, for example. You won't need to know how to perform critical path analysis, but you will need to understand, at least recognize it for what it is: critical path analysis, critical path method. I'm going to be talking about these more and giving you more exam-y context here in a moment. Again, a tool that we often use for project management might be Microsoft Project. Used to be far more popular in the past. We also have project lifecycle phase 3. That's continuous monitoring, where we use benchmarks, milestones, deliverables. Controlling is where we keep our project moving based upon our monitoring. We adjust to unexpected delays and any issues that may interfere. And then finally, we deliver and close the project once the deliverables are achieved. We will, in that phase, obtain our client acceptance, release and evaluate project personnel, identify, reassign remaining project assets. Now then, as much as I've taught you so far, what do you need to know for the exam? Well, this is pretty well background stuff at this point, because you're going to learn as I teach the stuff that you really need to memorize for the test: boldface, italicized font. And we haven't really seen that so far, so this is really just preparing us for general understanding that we'll need to be able to apply later. So as we look at this, for example, within a project or for information systems audit, let's look at our IS audit roles and responsibilities. Again, ISACA may ask you, which of the following would you consider the primary reason for conducting an IS audit? And the answer you would go towards would be something akin to determining whether a system safeguards assets and maintains data integrity. So you can see here how to interpret this bullet as a question. Again, the answer that we're looking for is determining whether a system safeguards assets and maintains data integrity. I can't predict so well the questions or how ISACA will word the questions, but I do have a very good feel for the right answers and the right topics and the right points, the truths, if you will, that ISACA wants to test you on. So I'm much better at understanding the answers that you need to know, because they change up how they ask the questions around those answers. So as we move forward, focus on that bold-faced italicized font, because that's going to be most recognizable on your exam as a good answer, is what that is. And you say, gosh, Alan, this is more than just an IS audit class. You're spoon-feeding me a test. Yep, that is the purpose of this session. I am not necessarily going to make you a great auditor, but I'm hoping to get you to pass that test for sure. That is the scope of this class. So the primary purpose of an audit charter is which of the following? To describe the authority, responsibilities of the audit department. Rote memorization, a lot of it. You're going to need to just memorize these points. You can do it from the slide deck that you'll be able to download. And also, like I said, you'll have access to practice questions. And if you feel like doing more, then you can, of course, take a look at the Certified Information Security website. So the responsibility, authority, accountability, the IS audit function is appropriately documented in an audit charter. But what else? It must be approved by the highest level of management, as opposed to the IT manager, as opposed to the information security manager. You get the idea. So when we take a look at the information systems audit lifecycle, which is, again, following that generic project lifecycle that I showed you earlier, we take a look at the planning phase of an IS audit. This is where, again, we have our scope, audit objective, statement of work programs. And again, I told you I would tighten it up for exam preparation. Here it is. When is your audit scope established? It's established during IS audit planning, and more precisely, at the client audit initiation meeting. That is the answer that ISACA is looking for. Memorization is your friend. So the audit methodology, again, we have to consider utilizing controls frameworks in our planning phase. We aren't using them yet, but we're determining which ones we want to use. We also understand that within any audit, materiality is very, very important. In other words, when we're auditing within a defined scope. And if something is out of scope, it is considered immaterial to the audit. This is where ISACA is going to really try to trick you if you're an IT person who doesn't really like scope. If you see a problem, you want to fix it, regardless of whether it was in the original scope or